Well, hello, hello.
Hello for our first episode of the month.
Wow. Yes, I did get a pinch and a punch from one of my kids this week, or last week, I should say, this week, the first. I'm like, oh dear. But hello, everybody. I'm Leanne.
And I'm Jason, and this is Let's Talk.
So this is a space where no topic is off limits. We cover things from well-being and resilience to leadership and money, relationships and mindset, and so much more.
And always here at Let's Talk, we bring different perspectives, those real life stories, those honest conversations, because the things we often don't talk about end up being the things that matter most to have conversations about.
Yeah, the things we should be talking about. So, our goal here is simple: to spark new ideas, to shift mindsets, and to give you some practical tools that you can use for your leadership and your life. So, welcome back to series 3. This is the continuation of the art of living, or the art of intentional living, I should say. And intentional really is the key. So far, we've explored things like the knowing doing gap, which we all suffer. We discussed clarity and vision in our second session, energy management, systems over motivation, because we don't have motivation problems, we have system problems. And today we're talking about something that sits underneath all of it, and that's boundaries. Because every conversation that I have with people, boundaries come up. I don't know about you, Jason, but the lack of boundaries, seems to be the reason so many people are stretched to capacity. It's where your energy gets drained because you're overgiving. Your priorities disappear because other people's priorities become more important, and your identity slowly gets shaped by everybody else's expectations, right? So you
Yeah.
kind of lose yourself in the process. And I love Prentice Hepfield. Their quote on boundaries, and it is that boundaries are the distance where I can love you and me simultaneously. So not just, people pleasing and I want to do it for you, but it's about you and me simultaneously. And I think that that's a beautiful start for our conversation today, because oftentimes we can feel like boundaries are going to have us be rejected. But boundaries are not rejection. Boundaries are actually self-respect in action. And I love that too, right? It's this whole idea around I matter too, not over, not less than, but equal to. And that's where self-respect in action really comes to light.
Yeah. Yeah, when you were talking earlier, Leanne, just a couple minutes ago, um, especially those people who struggle with saying no, um, which is something that I personally have worked on for a number of years now, where being more grounded in my no, which actually then makes my yes more powerful.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that leads off to kind of our first area of conversation is why people struggle with boundaries. And I know everyone does differently in different contexts at different levels, right? But some of the basics is that most people know they need boundaries, but in the end they struggle to set them. Now, great statement, but why? Right? Because boundaries trigger fear. And some of those examples of fear is that, the fear of disappointing people, right? Whether that could be personal relationships, family, um, it's kind of in like one bucket. And then there's professional fear too, right? Like disappointing your boss, disappointing your peers, because there's different dynamics that happen in the professional world than in the personal world. Um, and oftentimes there is some marrying together that does happen because we're so integrated anymore. But that bucket of disappointing people. Also, there's the fear of conflict, It's like, okay, well, it's easier not to set this boundary because if I do, then it's going to cause triggers in other people. And I just don't want to go there. Right. And then you see there's people on the other side of the spectrum too, that is like, no, set this boundary. And if conflicts happens, it's okay. Right. So there's people operating on both ends of that teeter-totter and a lot everywhere in the middle. There's also the fear of rejection, right? I mean, we've all felt that. And sometimes it's like, it's like you'll have your boundaries ish, the ish part of it, that it's like, well, ish kind of relates here because if I hold that boundary too steadfast, it's going to cause me to be rejected from whatever, especially if you have that need to belong. I mean, which we all do, but there's some people that just have that need to belong. And so knowing some of those individuals in my life, they have an ish with that boundary. Also, there's the fear of being seen as selfish, right? Well, if I have this boundary in place, it's going to seem like it's all about me, selfish me, blah, blah, blah. And so so with those examples, what happens is that people overcommit. They don't look at their bandwidth and they overcommit. And then a lot of things end up happening half-ass. I've seen that within myself when I've been to
I was just thinking I saw all of those things in myself, to be honest, Jason. Like, I know I have had fear of disappointing people. I avoid conflict. I had fear of rejection, and I don't like being seen as selfish, right? So boundaries for me were this kind of rickety thing that, wasn't actually any good. And I have spent years working on this space because
yeah.
of it. Which is why I think today's conversation is so the ish. I'm an ish in all of them. Well, I had been. I'm getting better. My training wheels are more secure.
Good. Mine too. Mine too. So yeah, instead what people do is they overcommit, they overgive. I am at fault at that. The giver just gives.
And the giving can be time, energy, resources, all sorts of stuff, right? Like,
yeah.
It's not that we give one thing, it's usually that we give all of ourselves, and then we're depleted.
Yep. And then what ends up happening is that silently you resent it later.
Yeah.
Right. Of the why did I? Oh my gosh, if I just would have known. And then the analysis paralysis hamster wheel starts happening. So the truth bomb of it all is when you don't set boundaries, you end up abandoning yourself to keep others comfortable. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And there's a lot in that statement.
Yeah. And I think abandoning self is almost worn like a badge of honor in some ways. Like, we're almost praised to be these overgivers and over explainers and to do all of this stuff. And that's why I think we have so much burnout and mental health issues and so many other things. Because if we can't protect ourselves and honor ourselves and not abandon ourselves, then that creates so many issues down the track. So, yeah. So let's talk about the neuroscience of people pleasing, because really this is the fundamental underlying kind of theme around not being able to set boundaries. And I want to unpack what happens in the brain for us around this space, because we know without a doubt that humans are wired for belonging. Like, we repeat this, it's a neuroscience foundation that we're wired to be part of the tribe and for our survival. And your nervous system interprets rejection, criticism, exclusion as threats, right? Or even near death experiences. Like that's the level of fear that comes up within us. If we're not part of the tribe, if somebody criticizes us, or if, we're rejected, well, then we're kind of isolated on our own in the savannah, fending for ourselves. And that's almost certainly death. And our reptilian primitive brain doesn't see the difference. So your boundary setting can feel really emotionally unsafe. And for a lot of people, that's huge. Like, I can't do that. What if, so this self-abandonment and this people pleasing often comes in, and it's a protective mechanism or a protective strategy. It's the way we self-protect in order to feel like we're part of the community, part of the tribe. And many people have learned, to do as you're told. And that often comes from loving parents with great intentions. But what it does, it violates our boundaries as children. If we say no and our parents don't agree, or our caregivers or whoever, they'll just overstep our boundaries, right? Even though we might have said no. And that sets us up for future. Well, no doesn't mean no, right? In lots of ways. And I don't necessarily mean that in a provocative way, but in lots of different ways. It's often where our boundary violation starts in childhood, and then we keep the peace, right? Because it's easier than that conflict piece. So, I'm just going to placate the situation and do what's needed to make sure that we've got this steady kind of operation model, even though it may not serve me and I'm, squeezing myself through. We don't like to upset others. Like, none of us have the intent of upsetting others. We would rather upset ourselves than somebody else. We'll do more for others than we do for us. We want to be easier to deal with and make it easy for people to like us. And the other part of it is also this whole desire to earn approval. And I don't know about you, but this whole need of being validated by external forces and external people really kind of can get in the way of us having healthy boundaries. And it becomes our conditioned behavior to keep doing these things in order to feel safe and secure, which means that even highly successful and highly intelligent people can struggle to say no. And if they do say no, they do that over explaining no, and then give you all these reasons. And I think the book was by Trent Shelton, and there was one line in it which I just loved, and it's been my kind of, it's what I hold on to now, is that no is a complete sentence. It's a complete sentence. We don't have to do the over explaining, the justifying, the defending, the anything like that. We don't have to. Sometimes it's nice to give a bit of context, but it's not, but we don't actually have to. We can just say thanks, but no, right? And just leave it like that. You could say, no, that doesn't actually work for me. Or I actually need some space right now. So no, I can't do that. And every time you say yes when you mean no, your nervous system feels it because it knows that it can't rely on you to protect it.
Yeah.
And that's the scary bit, right? So you end up almost kind of giving up on yourself in order to please everybody else. And then we wonder why people are so stressed out, so burnt out, so fatigued, so mentally strained and stressed because they want to feel safe and secure at the cost of their own nervous system.
Yeah.
So every time you say yes when you mean no, your nervous system really feels it. And then that trust, that self-efficacy kind of flies out the window.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting, Leanne, kind of as you were talking through this neuroscience part of it, right? It kind of made me float a little bit back to the pandemic, right? Where it was like we went from this world of, I mean, obviously some people were working hybrid. I mean, I was working a light hybrid, but majority of the world was working fully in person, right? And operating the way they were operating and showing up and all that. But then it was like, boom, we had to go all on lockdown, all virtual. And then it was like this rediscovery is like, well, what does boundary setting mean in the virtual world, right? And then it's like you're at home with your partner, and if you have kids and pets, and like, especially if you lived in a small place, it's like, well, what does that boundary setting look like, right? So it was like people had to do like almost like a 360 boundary setting, which, when you were talking feeling emotionally unsafe, like I think there was a lot of emotions that were present, feeling unsafe present. And then, as COVID has dissipated from what it was, and now more than ever, we're seeing more merging back into the, into the full in-person, light hybrid world. It's like, well, now it's like another like reshifting of what does boundary setting mean there, right? And I still see so many effects today. I mean, I don't know what it's like in Australia, but of just there's still a lot of COVID effects that people are still working through.
Yep.
Both at the personal level, professional level, team level, leadership level. So it's very fascinating in a way to watch and observe. But it's but I think people are trying to figure out like, well, what does it mean now again, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then
and I guess that's the point. It's not one and done, right? It's a constant evolution of us setting new boundaries, or as we evolve, our boundaries need to evolve.
Yes.
And to start with, we need to start with boundaries. And just in relation to that comment that you made about COVID, I remember this one organization, and I thought it was a beautiful quote. They said, we're now in people's homes where we've never been before. So we've got to give them the grace of having virtual backgrounds. They don't want us to see, if they haven't invited you into their home when you were working side by side, all of a sudden we're in their home completely. We can see the kids, the dogs, the mess, the everything else. So it really shifted the landscape.
Oh
And
yeah.
and now organizations in Australia particularly want most people to go back into the offices, right?
Same here.
There's a lot of hybrid now, and I think that's beautiful. That was one of the absolute bonuses of COVID, the fact that people could have a more hybrid working environment where they can work from home sometimes and go into the office and do that sort of stuff. But a lot of organizations are trying to force people back, and people have set this boundary now. It's like, no, this works for me. And
Yeah.
I'm actually more productive when I'm working from home. I'll give you 2
Yeah.
days in the office and that's it. So it's interesting to see how that evolution has all kind of played out.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Like I remember a coworker, I was working in higher ed at the time when COVID started, and she had little kids, like preschool, kindergarten. And it's like she was like, I had my command center that looked out, and it's like Zoom, kid on Zoom here, kid on Zoom here.
Yep.
It was
It was insane.
it was insane.
It
And
was insane.
I think one of the biggest things that I learned from a professional level is, not that I didn't do it before, but I was really more intentional about it, and I had a bigger aha around it, is where to give grace. Like, okay, like I don't have little kids at home. I don't have pets at home. So I have literally no clue of what that looks like on a day-to-day basis. So my area of judgment, had to be like, had to have some perspective to it. So yeah, it was an insane time. It's kind of seemed like a lifetime ago in some ways, but I definitely think it fits well within today's conversation, because where we've merged and where we're still merging, and then what that's going to look like in 5-10 years with artificial intelligence. There's going to be different boundaries then, right?
Yeah.
Which I think this conversation that we've been having the last couple of minutes moves nicely into what boundaries are actually, right? And I think you noted, they're not walls. It's not like it's a brick wall that's built and nothing can be maneuvered or re-looked at or uh, recalibrated. So they're not walls. But what they are, which is really awesome, is that they're standards, right? They're kind of standards that you operate by. They also provide limits of, how far or not far you're going to go, right, with something. They also really help to set expectations. Um, whether that's expectations in like a personal relationship, family dynamics, professional atmosphere, and setting those expectations. Yeah, they might be a little uncomfortable for folks at the beginning, but like with anything, you get used to it, right? I mean, you get in the rhythm of like, okay, well, this is Leanne's expectation here. So I respect it and I don't go beyond that, right? Um, so know that it's okay that there's an area of uncomfortability for a little bit when you set expectations. And they also are protection for what matters most to you. And what comes up for me there is that, because, like I'm a huge values person, right? So when you have good boundaries in place that cause standards, limits, expectations, and what matters most, it's actually, especially if you really align your boundaries with your values, then you're going to feel more fulfillment and in alignment with how you're moving your life forward. I'm not
Totally.
saying adjustments can't be done, but if you align those to your values, I mean, you have freed so much up for your nervous system,
I often
right?
say to business owners, that are time poor, because let's face it, we're all running on the treadmill, right? And that time is always an issue that you hear. And I often say to them, if you don't value your time and set boundaries around it, no one else.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
unfortunately, the thing with that is that we often feel like other people overstep our boundaries. But the truth is, it's us that gets wobbly, ishy with them that let them drop,
Mm-hmm.
and then other people will take advantage of that, right? So it's not an external thing. As always, it's an internal job,
Yep.
because other people will do what you allow them to do. So if you don't have these expectations, these standards, these kind of rules of engagement, then people will set their own for you. And
Yeah.
that's no fun.
No. As I was talking through this, and then as you were giving your additional commentary there, what made me think, Leanne, is like, from a performance standard, right, or performance point of view, wouldn't it be awesome as like as you're setting your goals for the next year to actually like recreate your boundaries?
Yeah,
Like if there was actually a section in your performance review of like what are your boundaries, I don't know, it'd just be interesting to see how that would all fold out. um and some people probably set boundaries within goals that they set, but it would be very interesting to see if that was like an actual section within performance management of like what that would look like and feel like and operate like within an organization.
totally. It'd be
Yeah,
interesting to witness that.
absolutely. So, as we kind of conclude this section, some examples of what healthy boundaries should sound like are the following. I'm unavailable at that time, right? Also, I can help with this, but not all of it. I need time to think about that, and that doesn't align with my priorities right now. And I think that comes down to articulation training, right? If you can articulate your boundaries in a healthy way, more times than not, people will respect it.
They might not like it, but they'll
They may
respect
not
it.
like it. Exactly. Exactly. But if you can articulate it instead of that over explaining, which I know I have done in the past of like,
Me too.
well, no, but, and it's just like, Jason, they don't need all that extra commentary. All they needed was, I'm unavailable at that time, you know, or, whatever it was in the past. So, I think some advice is like, make sure your boundaries sound, that you put them you put them together in an articulation way that's succinct and healthy sounding. And like we said, more times than not, they'll respect you, but like Leanne said, they may not like it. But if they have enough professional or personal respect for you, they'll be like, I got it.
Yeah.
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 So so some things to notice from those examples is that they were clear in delivery, they were respectful in language, they were calm, and they were not aggressive. And usually it's the opposite of those is what triggers people. So just some notes of wisdom as you're thinking about this and like thinking about how to language them. Because at the end of the day, boundaries are not about controlling others. They're about taking responsibility for your own self and what you have control over at the end of the day.
Totally, totally. So let's talk about where boundaries actually matter, because there's different places that we can look at around, okay, where should I actually set up boundaries? What would be useful for me to be able to do that? So the first one is emotional boundaries. And these are where we protect our emotional well-being. And we are emotional creatures having a human experience. And I often hear, organizations say, oh, leave the emotions at the door. But the fact is that we cannot. We are emotional beings and we do need to protect our emotional well-being at all costs, because if we don't, burnout occurs. All those other things that we talked about earlier can occur. So, examples of this is not absorbing everyone's problems. Like some of us will unintentionally put ourselves into somebody else's problem so we can help to solve it because it makes us feel good. Or their drama, we could be dramaholics to a degree. But if we don't absorb everybody else's problems, it's almost like you can see it. I'm looking through the window, but I don't have to open the window and jump into it. Right? And that doesn't mean that we don't help people. We can absolutely do that, but we don't have to take it on and make it our own. Not tolerating disrespect. And this one is a big one. I actually said to somebody last week, I will not continue this conversation right now. Call me back when you're calm, because I do not appreciate the way you're actually speaking to me. And there was no drama in that. And they got even more irate, but that was my boundary. I don't have to be spoken to that way. I will not tolerate disrespect. I'm happy to talk to you. And actually, in fact, I'd like to be able to work this out, but not like this. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Or not carrying the emotional labor for everybody else. We can pick it up. And if you're a mum, the emotional labor for your children is one thing. Like we have to kind of take some of that on, but we don't have to take it on for our partners or for other people. Their emotions are their own. It's up to them to be able to resolve that. We can support, but we don't have to bear the labor. We don't have to take on the weight of it all. So that's the emotional well-being kind of boundaries. And I think sometimes we've got to give ourselves permission to push back a little bit. And you often hear me talk about permission because it's the permission to love you and me simultaneously,
Yeah.
right? Like, and I keep going back to that because I think it's such a valuable comment. Professional boundaries could look like, if we don't have enough, it's like we're overworking, we're constantly available. We've got this blurred work life kind of thing happening. Like there's no separation, right? Like I take my work home, my personal life affects my work. Like all of this can kind of set in. So we need to be kind of setting some boundaries around this. I'm not constantly available. I turn my phone off at a certain time each night. I will work and I'm happy to do a little bit extra, but I will leave by, 5:30 or 6 o'clock instead of 10 o'clock, right? In the evening. So
Mm-hmm.
bringing these in. Digital boundaries could look like, turning off some of those bloody notifications that pop up all over the place, like you're working on something. And we talked about this at length. but reducing some of that noise, the beeps and the pops and anything that kind of drags your attention away. Setting some boundaries in that, or social media overload. Like, I'm not against social media. I think it has a time and a place. But when we get into doom scrolling and then we're there for ages, like, we need boundaries in place, because that's going to affect other areas of our lives and those around us that are nearest and dearest, which means that we're never really mentally switching off. And we need to switch off. We need to recharge our batteries. So I love a tech-free day once a month, or, going out into nature. And I used to go for walks, and I still do, as you know, Jason, and I take photos, but that is the only thing I use my phone for on those walks.
Yeah.
I don't make phone calls. I used to make phone calls, and then I wasn't enjoying the walk. I used to do a whole lot of stuff, whereas these days it's like, no, I want to appreciate the beauty of nature.
Yeah. I have a question for you, Leanne, in this digital boundaries area, because I know several months ago, Australia, and I know some other countries have done this since then, have banned social media for kids under 16.
Yeah.
Which I know you have a little one that is close to 16, but not quite there yet. My question to you is have you seen a difference?
No, they just find another way. If they ban one platform, kids will find another way. Like, the thing that it's a really interesting conundrum, right? Because that age group up till about 16, from about 13 to 16, their sole requirement in life is their peers, right? It's where they separate from parents and their peers become their number one priority. But what I've noticed is they're not necessarily on some of those other platforms, but they might be talking more on the phone as opposed
Mhm.
to doing the social. They might be playing games collectively, so whether it's Minecraft or Roblox or whatever the latest thing is that they're doing, but they're talking and playing. So I often hear lots of voices coming out of their rooms, but there's more interaction in that sense. And less
Mm.
comparison almost, right? So I think there's some really good stuff, but kids need to connect to kids, or teenagers need to connect to their peers. So it's a really tricky one. I mean, I was all for the social media bans, like the TikToks and the big companies, banning them. But kids will also lie about their age. They will do things. So now they have to actually show their school ID or a form of identification in order to sign up for some of those platforms, which is really good. Um, because historically, kids were just put in a different age, right?
Yeah.
So, they're getting smarter. So the companies need to get smarter around how to manage it. Um, I don't know what the outcome of that's going to be. It's only been a short period of time, like in the
Yeah.
last 6 months. It'll be interesting to see what the stats do
Yeah.
around that. But I think it would be better than what it was, for sure. And I think most parents agree that it's a horrendous thing for young people and their brain, because it ignites the reward systems. It creates addiction, just like gambling or anything else, that serotonin or that dopamine hit that you get with your likes and the rest of it. It's really bad. And there was a documentary, I think it was on 60 Minutes, or, one of the news shows, and they were talking about brain scans of elderly people with dementia and young people after massive social media use. And the same regions of the brain were already being damaged that they see in older
Mm.
people with dementia. And that is terrifying. It's
Oh,
terrifying,
yeah.
right? And we're doing this to our children, or allowing our children to do this, because it's easier to go and let them play on their thing, than interact with them or entertain them in a different way. So I'm glad that we've set it up, and I look forward to what the results are when they start feeding some of that back.
Yeah.
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 So we've talked about digital boundaries, we've talked about emotional boundaries, and we've talked about professional boundaries. The other one is relational boundaries. And this is probably the trickiest one of all, I find, saying no to people that we care about, um, or even being able to communicate our needs and not just being a pleaser. You often see it. Oh, what do you want for dinner? I don't mind. What do you want? Well, actually, what do you feel like? Like, check in, get to know yourself a little bit, right? Because that was me. I would never have communicated my needs before. I was always going to say, oh, I don't mind. If something was super duper important, I might have. But on the whole, it was like, I don't mind, you decide. And no, right? Sometimes I might want something. Sometimes it might be a different flavor that I want to eat today. So communicating your needs and again, giving yourself permission to, but also protecting your values and your standards. And that conversation that I had a bit earlier about disrespect, you can say what you mean without saying it mean. And I often share that with people because even my kids, they're all teenagers now, and we all know what teenagers are like. They talk back and they do all this wonderful stuff and eye roll, and it's all very disrespectful. And I'll often push back and go, I can't hear you right now because I can't listen to that tone. Come back to me when you can speak to me nicely. Or I'll say to them, you can say what you mean without saying it mean. Would you like to repeat that?
Yeah.
So we have to model this behavior as well for our kids. But relationships in general are the tricky points because they're the ones that will generally trigger most of our fears and our anxieties and all of that stuff because we want to belong and we don't want to be excluded. Um, so being able to communicate your needs in an effective way and saying no in an assertive way, but not an aggressive way. Um,
Yeah.
really helps you to then protect your values and your standards. And that's so important because, like I keep saying, if we don't do it, no one's going to do it for us. And
Yeah.
your life changes when you stop giving unlimited access to your time, to your energy, and to your attention. Like your life then becomes your life, not everybody else's interpretation of what your life should be. And I think that is super important.
Yeah. And two notes when you were talking about the first set of boundaries, the emotional boundaries, not jumping in and getting involved in everyone's problems, and like kind of reflecting back, like I did that more often than what I realized, where it was like, you know what, like I'm not, like I am literally no longer getting involved in your blank drama.
Yeah.
Because what I noticed as an aha and insight is I was providing a crutch
Mm.
for that person to then continually show up that way. Because it was like, oh, well, Jason will come save the day.
Yeah. Yeah. So you were enabling the behavior, right? Which we don't want to do. Right.
Right.
And the other thing
Exactly.
that shows up for me in that, because I used to do that a lot too, right? Like I don't want to get in there and save and help you and all the rest of it.
The coach in us.
Yeah. And I still do to a certain degree, but I'm very clear on where my line stops now. But the other people walk away feeling better because they've unloaded all of that stuff on you. And you walk away feeling heavy and toxic because you've now got this, stuff that's not even yours. And you've got to
Right.
somehow try and navigate that.
Right.
They walk away feeling good because they've been able to dump it. And you walk away now with this massive rock on your back, right? Trying
Yeah.
to hold the fort. It's
Yeah.
really
It's like a new, like as a new entity of responsibility of like, oh, okay, well, that person obviously came to me for A, B, and C reasons. And, but like I love that you put it that way, because reflecting back, it was kind of like, yeah, there was this freeing kind of like, okay, I got it all out. Now you go solve this, Jason. I'm like, wait a minute.
I'm fine. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then, like the other thing when you were talking about relational boundaries, it made me think of a quote by an org development pioneer, Peter Block, to where he said relationships are the force through which all work is accomplished,
True.
which it is. And, just imagine if all those relationships had healthy boundaries, actually how much more powerful that work would be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because people would be doing it by choice as opposed to through resentment.
Yeah.
They would say no to things that weren't important. Their priorities would be clear. The outcomes would be steady. There'd be so much more value in the output if everybody could come from that place.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, with all of that said, why are boundaries, why do they feel hard at first? Like I made a little bit of comment earlier saying that, boundaries, sometimes is going to make the the other party, person or person's a little bit uncomfortable at first, right? But then it becomes a new norm, right? So there's that uncomfortable feeling difficult at first. So this is important because people often feel guilty when they first start setting boundaries. I have felt, I because it's like, oh, but you go into that analysis like, what are people going to think, or how are they going to feel, or oh my god, like, am I setting myself up for failure? There's all the what ifs, right? So there's that guilty feeling. So it's not uncommon. It's a very common feeling, but it's not because boundaries are wrong. It's because they feel unfamiliar, right? So if you're operating in a boundaries ish space, setting more kind of hard slated boundaries that kind of have the to it, there's going to be some uncomfortableness because it's unfamiliar, because you're used to operating a little loosey goosey depending on who you're with, right? And sometimes people react when you change the rules.
Yeah, they don't like it. Sometimes people don't like
No.
it because they're used to you over giving, over servicing, over indulging their needs, right? So,
Yeah. I mean, like, I remember, like, in different jobs I've had, like working till 10, 11 o'clock at night, taking my laptop wherever I went, because, well, like I get this awesomeness of working from home, right? So if I need to run a 30-minute errand, well, I'm going to have my laptop with me just in case. Thank goodness I did a couple times have it with me, but there's that uncomfortableness, and there's that thought of like, well, if I don't have it, then I'm going to get this and this reaction, and that's okay. But you're not most people aren't thinking in that way, that it's okay that you get some of these people reacting because you're changing the rules. And also within this is that people who benefit from your lack of boundaries, the ish, may not like the new ones, right? They may not like the more in the ground boundaries, because discomfort does not mean you're doing something wrong, right? It actually may be one of the first times you're doing something right for yourself. And so as I lead this section, is that, you know, learning to be learning to be uncomfortable, or learning to be comfortable with the uncomfortable, that's where your growth happens.
totally. Totally. Um, yes, because we only ever learn through the pain and the discomfort, right? Not when the going
Yeah.
is good. So, and I really think that is so true. Like I have seen people in my world react when I have started saying no to things that I used to say yes to. And when I first started, like I would feel sick in the gut, that guilt, the heart palpitations, I would sweat, you know what I mean? Like it was a physical reaction for me
Mhm.
in learning how to say no to people or put boundaries in place. Whereas these days I'm like, yeah, no, like that's my standard. Yeah. Like, the yeah is let me think about it. No, I've decided no. And people actually say to me these days, wow, you didn't even have to think about that. And I go, no, didn't. Right. Like, absolutely not. Thank you. And I'm
Yeah.
so much clearer on that now. And I don't get those physical responses at nearly as much. Like sometimes there might be a little thing that kicks in. But I remember when I started, it was almost like I was going to pass out, like it
Yeah.
was the intensity of the guilt and the feelings of discomfort was so extreme, um, which is why I was always a bit ishish. Like if I got to that point, it's like, oh no, this is not good. It's obviously not right, so I would give up. Whereas once I learned that that was part of the process, and these days I can just go, yeah, no. Like just
Yeah.
so quick. And I'm
Yeah.
so grateful for that. And it's not that I'm selfish, it's that I'm self-caring.
Yeah.
I'm not surrendering my soul for the benefit of everybody else anymore. I am taking responsibility for me,
Yeah.
rather than hoping that others would take care of me, right? Because I was taking such good care of them and then resenting them when they weren't coming back. It wasn't reciprocal,
Yeah. Exactly.
right?
And and sometimes, and I don't know if this has happened to you at all, Leanne, when you've kind of set more clear boundaries, right? And are like super laser clear on what your boundaries are, right? And where you say yes, no, and let me think about it, is that, sometimes certain relationships are outgrown,
Mm,
you know, when new boundaries are set,
yeah,
you know, and then the guilt that comes from, well, am I betraying them? Am I, this whole thing, when it's like, no, like I've actually gotten to a stage in my life where I can actually set a clear boundary and not have the guilt of like the over giving, the over this, that, and the next thing, getting involved in people's problems and issues and all that kind of stuff. When it's like they've set that up as a default for themselves.
totally.
And yeah, so I mean, I've experienced some relationships that have just kind of outgrown themselves, and where they aren't kind of at the same space that they used to be,
Totally.
when I was operating more in my ish space.
Boundary-ish. I love that, Jason. That's going to stay with me. Um, I totally appreciate that because I've seen that experience in my life too. And, that reminds me of that saying, people come into your life for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And we want to hold on to everyone like they should all be lifetime people. But the truth is, it doesn't always do that. And we're constantly evolving and growing and learning and that's the natural form of life. And
Yeah.
I've had different situations where I've put boundaries in place. People have fallen away for whatever reason, not because I wanted them to, but just because my boundaries no longer benefited them, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they came back later. A lot of them came back later once they had evolved and grown and set boundaries and then had a deeper appreciation. Not everybody, um, but often, if that makes sense. So, sometimes it's a no for right now. It may not be a no for forever, and sometimes it may. But I've also come to terms with not everybody who is in my life is always going to be a forever person. Some of them might have been for a reason, so I could learn something, grow, whatever. Some might have been for a season to help me through something, or I was there to help them through something. And others are lifetime people, and lifetime people will appreciate your boundaries. They might
Yeah.
struggle with them at first, but they'll
Mm-hmm.
appreciate you and your boundaries because I think
Yeah.
I think we need to really speak about that. I think it's important. And um, there was something else I want to say, and it's evaded me now. Maybe it'll come back. Sorry.
Yeah.
So let's look at making this a little bit more practical. So, how can we speak boundaries in a way that works well? Right? And Jason, we might alternate with some of these if you want. Just so the
Yeah.
first one I'll speak to is work boundaries. And that's things like you could say things like, I don't have capacity for that right now. That's honest and truthful without throwing yourself under the bus. Or can we revisit this next week? I'm under the pump at the moment. Right. Or I need uninterrupted time to focus. Is it okay if I close the door and I can come back to you later? Like we can say these things which honor us, but it doesn't dismiss the other person. That's what I wanted to say. I can choose now whether I want to do things, right? That's where my power now comes from. Before I was compelled without choice. These days I can choose. So I may still help somebody who's in dire straits and I still might pick up their emotional load, but it's a choice I make with my boundaries in mind, as opposed to I have to because of my fear of rejection or whatever the case may be. That's what I wanted to say a few seconds ago. So even around work, your boss, somebody, your colleague, somebody might come in and, it's a priority for them, but you've got your own priorities,
Yeah.
and so we can say, listen, I don't have the capacity for that right now. Can I come back to you in a little while and then we can discuss it? Um,
Yeah.
which is still caring. It's just not self-abandoning through the process.
Exactly. Like it makes me think of like you're creating alignment with one another, like quick alignment, right? With
Totally.
like you said, not abandoning you and your priorities, but not dismissing them to where they're like, well,
Yeah.
who does she think she is? Or, who does she, or who does he think he is? Right.
Yeah.
So it's amazing how we can create alignment with succinct languaging.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah. So in the area of relationship boundaries, right, you can say stuff like, that conversation isn't productive right now. Can we talk about it tomorrow or when, we're both in a better space? Because there's obviously, in relationship, like a lot of emotion that comes in um, and who wants to have a conversation with somebody when they're being emotionally hijacked?
Totally. There's no point.
No,
There's no
no,
point.
no point at all.
I've actually even said to people around this one, I'm not in a good space to respond right now, and I'm concerned that anything that comes out of my mouth is not going to be useful. So can I have some space so I can regulate and then give you a good answer? Um, and that's taken because I know I might say something that I'll regret later, and I don't like that either. So,
Mm-hmm.
you know, we can set that up.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, we're when you said that, like, right now we're gearing up towards midterm elections, right? And so the media always flies in and zones in on like moments where people weren't at their best, right? And should
Always.
have said that and
Mm.
should have said that,
It
but they
should
didn't.
Yeah,
But
I've had many
it's just,
opportunities where I haven't said that and I should have, but I've learned over the way.
yeah.
So I just say to people, I'm going to remain silent right now because I know that anything I say can and will potentially be used against me in the future, and I don't want that.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's amazing on how you say the wrong thing in the wrong moment. And especially if you're in a position of public view, how it can just ruin your reputation like that.
Instantaneously.
Instantaneous, yeah. So another practical relationship boundary languaging is, I need honesty and respect in this relationship. And that could be professional relationship, that could be a personal relationship, right? um Relationship boundaries, I know when people think of relationship boundaries, they think, oh, well, it's my partner, it's my family, it's my friends, but it's also professional relationships too. And sometimes you need to have the languaging to articulate, I need honesty and respect in this relationship in order for us to move forward powerfully. And the third one is, I can support you, but I can't carry this for you. And this makes me reflect back in those times where I wanted to jump in, and I did at times, to like fix and, let me carry this burden for you and blah, blah, blah. And um, like if I just would have said that, right, on how like maybe different things would be in certain relationships of like, hey, like I can support you by listening, but I can't carry this out for you. Like that's a you responsibility, right? And sometimes it's so easy to say it's a you responsibility, but actually taking on that responsibility can be like, sometimes it can be scary because sometimes you just don't know the known that's going to happen, right? So like I wish I would have had that languaging back
Yeah.
at those times that that I reflect on.
Yeah, I can relate to that too, Jason, I might say. The next one, time boundaries. And like I said earlier, time is one of our commodities that we have a very limited amount of. So, responding to somebody with something like, I already have commitments, I'm sorry. Like, again, I've already got commitments at that time. I can't attend, or that won't work for me. We don't have to give much more than that, right? We can just kind of, no, sorry, that won't work for me. And the one that I use all the time now is let me think about it before I commit, or let me check my calendar and I'll come back to you. I love buying space in boundaries
Yes.
because it allows you to not respond with your knee jerk reactions, right? So it's one of my favorite ones to use in a whole range of different contexts. Let me think about that. Let me check my calendar. Let me come back to you on that. I don't have the capacity right now to think that through. Let me come back to you. And I find that it gives me the space to then actually check in and go, how do I actually feel about this? Is that something I actually want to do or not? And then I can go back and respond effectively rather than saying yes when I mean no, or saying no and then thinking about it later and going, "Actually, I didn't mind doing that. I could have helped." So the space helps. So I really love buying time, "Let me think about that," or "Let me check and I'll come back."
Yeah. No, I love that one, especially when you're like at a fair or something where there's all these salespeople and trying to get you to buy. And like I love buying that space. And and it's one of those things where I'm like, you know what, it's okay if they feel uncomfortable with the space I'm trying to create.
Yeah,
At the end of the day, I'm the one that's going to have to pay the monthly whatever, not them. They'll benefit from the commission, but like I love, like I actually have that one pretty well down.
me too.
Because it's like, no, like, you know what, I'm going to think about this before I spend this much money on whatever it is.
Yeah. And you can always use the scapegoat there too. "Oh, I have to check with my partner."
Yeah.
Right? So there's, I have to come back to you because I've got to check in with my partner, all financial decisions we actually make together. Um, and that again buys you time. And then you don't have to feel like the bad guy, so to speak. Not that I mind that so much these days, but some people still struggle.
Yeah, absolutely. And this last area of boundaries is emotional boundaries. And a couple examples of some languaging that you can use is that, I'm not available for disrespect, you know, um, and like I know that one kind of feels a little gutsy, but if you're feeling disrespected, it's okay. Like I'm not available for that. Let's table this and we'll come back together when we're both in a better space.
Yeah,
And the second example is I understand what you're feeling or your feelings, but I'm not responsible for managing them.
that's a big one.
Huge.
Yeah, because most people will want their partner, friend, whatever, to make them feel better. Like, "You did this to me." Well, no, your feelings are actually yours. And I understand that you feel that way, but it's not up to me to navigate that for you, right? You can't expect me to adapt and change everything about me just so you're not triggered. You need to manage your triggers, right? Um, so that one's a big one, especially in intimate relationships.
Yeah, exactly. And um, um, intimate relationships like dysfunctional family dynamics, um, best friends, people who you're like super duper duper close with. It's like, they want to make a lot of times they want to make the other person who's getting triggered wants to make you feel like you need to manage their emotions. But really at the end of the day, it's like emotional responsibility, right? It's like what you're feeling is your feeling and it's okay to feel it.
Totally. I
You
don't have to
know,
take it on though.
feel your feelings, but the management and taking it on is on you. That's you work that you need to
Yeah,
do.
totally. So really what we're trying to say here is that clear boundaries create cleaner relationships. So clear communication is really the key. Um, and Dr. Brene Brown often says, clear is kind, unclear is unkind. So the clearer we can be in our conversation, the better. Sorry, I just heard it sounded like somebody's roof just got ripped off. There's a lot of wind that's just shown up here. Scared me. So yeah.
Yeah, so now we're at our time of some reflection before we go into our key takeaways and resources and books and all that. So our conversations always go so fast. It's like,
Especially this one. I could have talked for so much longer about this.
Oh, absolutely. So, Leanna and I want to leave you with a few questions to ask yourself around this boundaries equals self-respect. Is one, where am I overextending myself? And if you want to do this personal and professional, just take a sheet of paper or flip chart piece of paper, line down the middle, line across the top, personal, professional question. And if you want to do both categories. So again, where am I overextending myself? Secondly, where am I tolerating that's draining me? I think that's a great question, right?
Yeah,
And the
what
last
am I
question,
tolerating? Because we tolerate so much, right? That zaps our energy.
yeah,
It is a great question.
yeah. Excuse me. And the third question is, what boundary would change my life right now?
And I'd even like to add to that question, what boundary would change my life for the better right now?
Yeah.
Because it's from good to great that we want to go to at the end of the day. So, you know, how could it get even better than this? And what boundary needs to be in place for that to happen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Love
yes. And in the tolerating question, I think a lot of the tolerating comes in those boundary issues,
in the issues.
right?
Yep. Totally.
Issues. So those are three questions to really contemplate on. And just really remember at the end of the day, boundaries are not a punishment, folks. What they are is clarity. And as Dr. Brene Brown says, we've referenced her many, many, many times throughout these first, second, and now third series. She says, clear is kind, unclear is unkind.
And the kind is to you and the other. And the unkind can be to you and the other. So if I'm not clear, I'm being cruel to myself and to you because resentment kicks in. But if I'm clear, then that is kindness to me. And you're also clear on what the boundaries are. There's no confusion. So there's so much in that little phrase. But clarity and being clear is kind. And I think it's wonderful.
We need more of that in the world today.
We do.
All right. So we are at our 3 takeaways and resources. All right. So what are our top 3 tips? So from today's comprehensive conversation, which has been rich and so many gold nuggets and just so many areas that we could have an episode alone on each of them, is the first one is that boundaries are self-respect in action. Right? So if you were to think getting into action around around your boundaries, you're creating self-respect. And who doesn't want that? Right? Secondly, is saying yes to everything often means saying no to yourself. And that's like where I said at the very beginning of this episode is that when I got more powerful in my no, my yes became more powerful when I did decide to say yes. So saying yes to everything often means saying no to yourself. And lastly, protecting your energy is essential for intentional living. And that's the whole kind of umbrella part of this series is the art of intentional living. And boundaries and self-respect are a huge part of that. So when you protect your energy, you're actually living more intentionally to your values, to your boundaries, to what makes you get up and go in the morning. Anything else you'd like to add here, Leanne?
In that you thrive, not just survive.
Yeah.
That's it. That's all I wanted.
Oops.
So
Okay.
as usual, we have some books and some YouTubes and some podcasts for your reference if this is a topic, or if you're like me, where boundaries are a constant work in progress. There's some great resources out there. The first one is Set Boundaries, Find Peace by Nedra Tawwab, I think is how you pronounce her name. And it's a practical and empowering guide around setting healthy boundaries in relationship and in everyday life. She explains how clear communication and self respect create healthier, more sustainable connections everywhere. So it's a really useful book to give you the nuts and bolts around that. The second one is The Book of Boundaries by Melissa Urban. And this book provides simple scripts, a bit like what we've given you today, some really short scripts, and real life examples for communicating boundaries with confidence and clarity. Because sometimes that's what happens, right? We go to set our boundary, our voice cracks, we don't feel good about it. So, this book is a highly practical guide and helps remove the guilt and over explaining that many of us struggle with when we're trying to set our boundaries. So, that's the Book of Boundaries. And the last one is Essentialism by Greg McKeown. And this is a powerful reminder that not everything deserves your time, your energy, or your attention. And they explore how focusing on what truly matters actually leads to greater impact, to peace, and to alignment. And peace and alignment, isn't that how we want to show up every day? So, they're the 3 books. And then there's a couple of TED Talks, Dare to Disagree by Margaret Heffernan or The Power of No by Vanessa Patrick. The links to these will be in our, in YouTube. We'll put them there for your reference. And then obviously a couple of longer ones there. One is by Nedra, who we've just spoken about her book. Then there's Mel Robbins, and the Let Them theory is a fantastic book, but this is really about stop people pleasing, right? So she goes into that. And Dr. Gabor Maté is an amazing. I don't know if you've ever watched any of his stuff, Jason. He talks about trauma, and about what happens to us and our authenticity and how to set boundaries. He his story is like powerful. The things that he's been through and what he's learned along the way. Does a lot of great work. So I highly recommend anything by Dr. Gabor Maté. If you haven't watched any of his stuff, definitely double click on that one. So that's the resources for this week.
Awesome. Resources aplenty. Okay, so episode 28. Can't believe we're almost at 30 episodes already. But next week's episode in this series of intentional living is the courage to be seen, visibility, leadership, and playing bigger. So, and who doesn't want to play bigger? I know it sometimes can be scary, but once you get into it, it's a lot of fun. So it'll be next week, Wednesday, May 13th here in North America, and Thursday the 14th in Sydney, Australia. So we look forward to you tuning in for that episode.
Absolutely.
So this is just, oh, I'm sorry, Leanne.
No, go for it.
This just a snapshot of the remaining episodes. And I think we're ready to close out.
Yeah. So just before we move to our outro, I just want to say to you, really, truly, from the bottom of the depth of my heart, your life improves when your boundaries become clearer, right? You find more peace, right? So protect that peace, protect your energy. It is the most important resource that you have, and protect the life that you're trying to build. Because if we don't, other people's agenda will rule our lives, and that's not okay. So I'd love
Yeah.
to ask you one final question, and is what's one boundary that you know you need to set but keep avoiding? And do it now.
Do it.
Do it.
Yeah.
Just do it.
Yeah. I saw this quote the other day that kind of flows into that, that says, every time you level up, your old life will try calling you back.
It does.
Don't answer.
Yeah. So true.
Yeah. So with that, thank you for to joining. Thank you for joining us for today's conversation on boundaries equaling self-respect, protecting your time, energy, and identity.
We hope that it sparks something new for you, and insight, a fresh perspective, normalizing the ick that happens in this space, or even just now you've got a question that's worth exploring a little bit further.
Absolutely. And as always, here at Let's Talk, our mission is simple: to have the conversations that matter and to remind you that you don't have to navigate this complicated, sometimes amazing, sometimes uncomfortable thing called life alone. We're here to have the conversations beside you and to help give you some tips and tricks and tools for your toolbox to navigate life a little more intentionally.
So if you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with a friend, subscribe, like, do all the things, and keep the conversation going with us.
Because when we talk,
We really talk.
and anything is possible
So let's talk
with real conversations.
and limitless possibilities. Thanks, everybody. Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone. See you next week.
See you next week.